Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. I know that this year's been challenging for a lot of people, myself included, but this isn't going to be one of those dreadful positive thinking exercises. I recently saw something on LinkedIn and somebody was talking about blonde life coaches in trilby hats saying that the universe never throws more at us than we can handle. For a start, I've never worn a trilby hat, and also it's just not true. On a serious note, look at the statistics on suicide and we can see that an awful lot of people are throwing things that they just can't cope with, that are far more than they can cope with. And it's also a bit disingenuous towards coaching and the profession of coaching. A lot of us will never say anything like that. So this is not going to be one of those faux positivity podcasts. That's not the kind of person I am. What I am thinking about today, though, is how we're going to cope in these moments when we are thrown things that are really challenging. We need to find ways of managing. And these don't just happen when we are grown up. When we're small, we're thrown moments that we need to work out how we're going to cope with. And when we're small, we don't understand the world very well. So what we do is we need to find ways of making what's actually overwhelming to us. We need to find ways of coping with them, of understanding them in ways that our minds can cope with actually what's going on. So what we do is we create stories and we create narratives for ourselves. So what I'm talking about today is how we create meaning where we can't find meaning for ourselves. I'm going to take us back into the myths of time, or through the myths of time. Might actually be giving away my age here. Many of you will remember a magazine called Smash Hits from our youth. For me, it was when I was about 11 or 12 years old. It was incredibly trendy. It was the magazine to be seen carrying around school or to be reading in your break time. Absolutely, all the cool kids had Smash Hits. And one of the things that Smash Hits would periodically do was that they would bring out a sticker album. Now this would include all our favourite bands and singers of the time, and everyone would get very excited. And for the next 2 or 3 weeks, you'd get free Smash Hit stickers, and they would come with each edition of the magazine, and everyone collecting them would get very excited. And obviously some would be more difficult to get than others, and would need to swap with other people. So, for example, if you had too many Nik Kershaws and you needed a Simon Le Bon, you could swap that with somebody else. And then it got to the point that some of these were really, really difficult to get hold of, and they stopped sending them out in editions of the magazine. You could buy them in places such as WH Smith's and all other places like that. But then it got to the stage where at the end of the album, you'd always have some that you couldn't get hold of. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to send off a cheque or a postal order. In those days, it was something like £1.50. Or maybe it was you collected the vouchers from Smash Hits and you'd write off and you'd have to wait 28 days for what you'd ordered to be sent to you. I mean, you really did have to wait 28 days. This is something that my children are still appalled with. They think, how on earth could you manage with 28 days for delivery? And I'm like, well, we did. We also didn't have the internet then, too. But we seem to manage. Okay. I think also as well, it might have been something like you could only have a certain number of stickers per person. I think I possibly created a fictional extra brother to get all the stickers that I needed. So I sent off my tokens and I sent off my postal order, whatever it was. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting. And back when you were 11 or 12, 28 days is an awful long time to feel that you're waiting for this. And obviously life was happening around me whilst I was waiting for these stickers to turn up, and I was going to school. And at that time, my dad was applying for other jobs. We lived in Blackpool in Lancashire, and he was applying for jobs elsewhere. He applied for a job in Wakefield. He went for the interviews and he was successful. Now, for my dad and my parents, they were really happy. I didn't want to move. I really didn't want to move. I was secure in going to school, in who I was spending time with. And the day that my parents told us we were going to be moving to Wakefield because my dad had got this job, I was absolutely devastated. I really didn't want to go because for me, I was losing everything that I understood, everything that I knew, my way of life. I mean, there were definitely things that I was quite happy to leave in Blackpool, but it was such a big fear of the unknown, I didn't want to do it. So I was extremely unhappy that day. And then the next day, guess what turned up in the post? My smash hit stickers. And from that moment on, I created this idea within myself, this narrative that if anything bad happened, then to balance it out, the equivalent of my smash hit stickers would arrive the following day, or very soon afterwards. And this was my way of coping. I guess what I'm saying is here, my young brain couldn't manage without finding a way of coping. And so what I did was I constructed myself a narrative to help me manage this situation. Now, the downside to this then becomes that you can't just have something good for something good's sake. You're almost waiting for the reverse of the smash hit stickers to turn up, and this would balance things out. And as you grow older, whilst it becomes obvious that the world doesn't really work this way, there's always a temptation to think that it does. So what's going on here? In my smash hit sticker example, we can see that what I'm doing is I'm trying to make sense of the world. There's a huge amount of anxiety for me coming up with a big move, and one way that I try and control it is by thinking that everything's going to be okay. The universe will find a way of balancing itself out. So if I was a blonde life coach wearing my trilby hat, this is exactly what I'd be saying. There's balance and order in everything. Yet we know that's not true. It's just something we tell ourselves to help us feel better. So let's dig into some psychodynamic concepts and ideas here. The idea of stories that we tell ourselves was actually really important for Freud as he developed his theories. For him, the idea of storytelling was our way of combating anxiety and loss. We've mentioned before that our brains want to avoid anxiety at all costs, and I do talk a lot about defence mechanisms and how these are going to pop up repeatedly to keep us safe. One psychodynamic idea, one concept that you might have heard of, is the fort-da game. So this is where Freud observed one of his grandchildren playing with a cotton reel whilst he's in his cot. The little boy, who was called Ernst, would throw the cotton reel out of the cot saying "ooh," which Freud saw as fort, which means gone. And he's forcing his mother to return it to him. And when his mother does return it to him, the child says "ah" or "da," which means there. So we've got there and we've got gone. What we're looking at here is the child managing the anxiety of the parent leaving and that they have no control over this. So what we're doing is, in these situations, we're creating a story in which the child does have some form of control. Remember, for an 18-month-old child, the family, particularly the parents and the mother, are their world, and there's an unbearable sense of loss when the mother leaves the room. So by acting this scenario out with a toy, the child feels that he has some form of control with this. This can also link to the repetition compulsion. Now, we've talked about this before. This is where we repeat patterns that help us feel safe. These can be an illusion, but they work for us at the time, which is why we keep coming back to them over and over again. So in my example, we're back to my childhood self of balancing out the universe. We've got something difficult, tricky, anxiety-inducing happening, and boom, the next day, something that I've been looking forward to for ages turns up for me. Is this such a bad thing? Well, yes and no. The world is a scary place, and we do need to find ways of managing our way through it. We can often feel out of control, and we need ways to help us realise that actually we probably have more control than we think we do. Yet creating false narratives and making up reasons is possibly going to do more harm than good. And our ideas of what are good and bad things can change from moment to moment. Do I still want the things I wanted 20 years ago? No. Do I want smash hit stickers now? No. Although thinking about it, they might be quite collectible and provide me with a little pension bonus. So who knows? What I'm saying is, if you end up in a challenging scenario, don't spend your time hanging on for the smash hit stickers. Consider what you might need right now to help manage your anxiety and help you feel in control. If you feel that you're waiting for something else to give you that moment of feeling in control, you could be waiting an awful long time and you could be missing out on huge amounts of opportunities and possibilities for you in the meantime. My invitation to you this week is for you to consider where in your life you might have been waiting for your smash hit stickers to arrive whilst life has been happening around you. Have you been hanging on for something in the hope that it will balance out something else? There's every chance you might get your smash hit stickers, but no one knows when they're going to arrive in the post and what they will look like when they do. Smash hit stickers might even arrive in disguise. And as always, give yourself some grace. It can be unnerving to discover that you've been creating narratives and giving meaning to your world to help yourself feel safe. Realising that we are feeling anxious can give us pause to think in itself. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet and you can find the link for this in the show notes. If you'd like to have a chat with me about psychodynamics or whether I'm the right coach, supervisor or mentor for you, then click on the link that's also in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.